that you'll be able to go back and view the video. And likewise, we'll be doing that with the other 2 weeks as well. And we'll do our CEUs at the very end. And I just, thanks for taking time out of your Saturdays. And I know this will be well worth our time. So with that, I'm just going to turn it over to Isaac and take it away.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm super excited for this. It feels like a super long time coming. We had conversations for a while about trying to do this, and then we finally managed to work something out. So I'm really excited. So right away, I'll just introduce myself. My name is Isaac Rohr. As Wendy said, I'm one of 3 people who are part of the new electronic music and recording arts program at McPhail. We're calling ourselves EMRA for short. The kind of, maybe if there's a guiding principle of what we want to do, is it would be something along the lines of, obviously in part, a resource for learning about music technology and about applying it for students and teachers alike, but also kind of driving a new perspective in terms of music education in general. And I think it just kind of comes with the territory and has a lot to do with what I'd like to kind of talk about today, maybe address, just due to the fact that a lot of this technology is developed away from the music institution in particular. A lot of it is pipeline oriented in terms of media production and things like that, and has slowly kind of become accessed by us or your students or my students or whoever, right? It sort of has come down from those upper echelons. And in that process, for a host of reasons that aren't really worth getting into today, it sort of like jumped just past a lot of institutions in terms of sort of its access or its understanding. So I'd like to read the description of the course again, or of the course of what we're doing today, of what I wrote. And then I'll kind of get started on this talk or this revelation or whatever this is. So let me share my screen because we're going to be looking at some things today. So before I just read this over really quick, I want to say, I know Wendy mentioned Zoom etiquette, but I will be keeping an eye on the chat. And I want to just put out there that I'd like this to be open in terms of if anybody feels like there's something on their mind while I'm talking about some of these things or going over anything at all, I'd love for you to bring those things up, because that will help me illustrate some things while I talk about these things, but also because I'd love to hear your thoughts, and I'd love to make this multi-sided. I was going to say two-sided, but right now it feels one-sided, and I'd love for it to be open. So don't feel any pressure, but if anybody ever feels like saying anything or having any questions, then I'll open things up here and there. Please feel free to speak up or type in the chat. Like I said, I'll keep an eye on it. So yeah, this is the description. This is an email that I originally sent out because I think it might be the only place that I have it right now. The title, of course, Auto-Didactic Guidance, What I Needed and What I Do. The description, loving music today means being tapped into a vast networks of sounds and styles where anyone, anywhere can have a shared experience. Thus, our teaching must become as non-linear and branching as this network. Using my own work in education as a base, we will explore the not-so-new spaces of autodidactic music education, how the people of today are forming their own educational spaces and the blind spots they create. So right away, I want to just say, like I mentioned about illustrating a point, I'd like today to be a bit of also a case in point kind of a moment, maybe, to try to help illustrate better what I believe could be an efficient way of understanding and sort of providing for and guiding students who are deeply tapped into this, and whether they realize it or not. And for those of you who are deeply tapped into this and looking for a way to apply these things, this is, I mean, largely the internet. I said our teaching must become as nonlinear and branching as this network to describe communication across our world right now. We're at a point where the pipelines that used to exist in our institutions are either, it's like, I don't know how many of you actually know about actual internet service providers. But for example, when you get internet to your house, depending on where you live, they need to figure out a way to bring that cable there. And sometimes it goes along the original infrastructure. So like often literally through pipelines in the ground. Sometimes it goes through I live right by an alleyway, so I'm pointing at my my power line. Sometimes it goes on, like through the power line, or sometimes it goes on the power line that was just there. And depending on that situation, they can sometimes be like a bit out of sync, a little less high fidelity, which is to say that, when we are trying to communicate or connect with somebody at a distance from where I am, it might be fuzzy. I might not be able to exactly get what I'm wanting to get, or I may misunderstand certain things on the other side because I'm over here and I'm trying to understand, and I might miss things like that. So this winds up happening just due to the fact that we're so interconnected with the internet. In a lot of ways, we're now like dealing with our culture evolving around literally communication, and it's facing the exact same type of not hiccups. I keep thinking the word hiccups. We're facing all these same types of things tends to pop up basically within the culture itself, just due to the fact that a lot of what we're dealing with is through communicative methods. So sometimes, for example, in my experience, when I'm this ties to my experience. So let me introduce myself so then I can kind of dive into how I experienced this growing up. I'm 29. I've frankly been going to school for a very long time. I just finished my master's degree at Cal Arts. I moved around quite a bit as a kid, but I went to Brainerd High School. So I grew up north, or at least, a lot of my formative years were spent there. I was in the Brainerd High School Chamber Orchestra. I sat first chair cello. I played at, we always used to call it CLC conference. I don't remember if it's still called that or not, or if it was even called that, frankly, where, played with all the orchestras around the state, or at least northern Minnesota. And meanwhile, I was spending an maybe unreasonable amount of time online. Probably not so unreasonable now, because I think spending a lot of time online is much more normal now. But even, I mean, this was back in, 2007, 2008, 2009 or so. It was a lot of time spent in my basement, learning, honestly. Um, I was mostly failing school. I have ADHD, so that's a huge part of that as well. Part of the reason that I'm fascinated by this idea within our institutions. I'm intrinsically motivated as a result. And so a lot of that, it's less so now, I'm sure, but particularly back then, it became very apparent to me, even in high school, that being intrinsically motivated, an autodidact, wound up running into question marks a lot. I'm so glad to see somebody else has ADHD too. Somebody direct messaged me. So that said, while part of the thing with ADHD being so intrinsically motivated is that outside of the things that I was interested in, I wound up slipping a lot because that required extrinsic motivation to be able to get myself to do something. That all said, I went to school every day and came home and went online and learned. And I learned from all over the world. I learned drum and bass production from the UK and Eastern Europe. I learned about K-pop and J-pop and Japanese noise music. I learned about Balinese and Javanese gamelan music. I learned about Italian Renaissance music. I learned about Baroque era classical music and technique. I watched scores for turn of the century Romantic era music. I spent a bunch of time on Wikipedia learning about 12th tone and Schnittke, and I spent a bunch of time learning about new complexity music from the 80s and minimalism. And I learned about music production, pop production, hip hop production, all these things, which then I couldn't take back with me sort of to my classroom. And on one hand, that doesn't mean that I was expecting that I had to be able to do those things in my classroom. And I also don't think that that's necessarily what I might say would be something of a direction to go in if I'm looking at my description here and trying to form maybe a concrete belief around it. But it is to say that what I wound up lacking was no longer basically like education. And what I wound up lacking was no longer an actual technical education. I was not missing a way to figure out how to do things, minus certain things that were still locked up in the institution. But what I did wind up not having basically was an awareness of the pipelines that were actually around me. I lost the ability to recognize where I could go. I lost the ability to recognize or the ability to link those things to where I actually was. It was funny because as I started going to school, I started to recognize that I had learned about all these things all over the world. I had learned about this, minimalism that was happening in New York City, for example, or I was learning about like stuff that, as far as I was concerned, was happening at the time that I was learning about it. And I still do this, but it was happening in the United Kingdom, for example. And I particularly, I do attribute this as a sort of a uniquely Minnesotan thing too. I didn't realize that nonetheless, I needed to know how to apply those things to where I lived. And I needed to know how those things actually functioned where I lived. And I think, honestly, I'm not here to necessarily answer anything, because I don't think that there is a correct answer right now, due to the fact that like what I'm talking about is essentially something that's just a multiplicitous problem across all of our little world right now. But music right now is kind of on the forefront of that, particularly with learning online and self-teaching. And so that leads to the last part of my description about not so new spaces of autodidactic music education, and how the people of today are forming their own educational spaces and the blind spots that they create. That music might be the place that this was maybe first experimented with. I think if I, and I will ask, but I think if I asked, how many of us use YouTube to figure something out, it would probably be a bunch of us, or if not all of us at some point. I remember when I was in high school, Wikipedia was still like maybe don't use it like as a for sure source, but like probably check it out. But like, go find like a academic journal or something to cite those claims or something. And again, I'm not a K-12 educator, so I don't necessarily know what the protocol is now, but I would definitely say at the very least, I get this feeling that it's perhaps a bit like calculators. Like, don't use a calculator, please show your work, do it on paper, even though I have it on me all the time. And it will become, and some people use those tools to get through life. So yeah, okay. So that definitely makes me feel like I'm kind of done covering my little description before actually jumping into some of these things. Thoughts, questions, anything? You need to move your mouth. I'd love to hear, or hands in the chat. If anybody has anything they want to say, again, absolutely no pressure, but I'd love to set aside some time just to make sure.
I'm interested about where to go. I'm really interested in what you said about like, coming to the realization that what you were missing was like how to connect to, I don't know, I think you used what did you use? Your pipeline, that word?
Yeah, totally. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, pipeline. And then I'm thinking about my students, and I'm like, because they come to my classroom with like so much knowledge and so many skills that I'm like, how do I, and you have, I have, I'm super curious about how to be somebody to help partner with students to like facilitate the like
Yeah.
next steps, right?
Yep.
Because that's what I feel like my main job is as an educator, as a facilitator, and
Yes.
so of knowledge and opportunity and all of this. So
Right.
I just wanted to tell you that I'm definitely hearing you and
Awesome.
excited to talk further about like how to
Cool.
navigate that with students. So thank
Great.
you.
Thank you. Thank you. Somebody direct message me. So if anybody has any other thoughts, please chime in. I'm just going to see if there's anything, because it is directly to me, but I'm going to see if there's anything relevant that I could bring up to help people. Cool. Just an appreciative DM. Okay, great. Yeah. Where to go. I wrote down a note about that. Where to go, how to partner with students, so kind of facilitate some of those things. I think that's it's cool to hear that that's what it's sparking. And I think perhaps that's what we're feeling a little bit in general. I know, like, again, I have a admittedly limited experience in terms of long term with seeing what like how young people are coming to us and what they have, because I've largely taught privately and I've largely just been around people. I'm now that I'm with Emra, I'm getting opportunities to teach groups, and so I'm seeing a lot more people of different ages and seeing where they're at. But I think that's I think that how you said, Allison, how to partner and facilitate. Partnering and facilitating, I think, is those are great keywords. So let me move some things out of the way here. Let me pull up my notes too again. So I have a note here that I'm just going to read kind of verbatim. I want to also just say that I think right now this isn't necessarily a guaranteed experience of everyone. Like again, I know that I'm in a niche position due to the fact that I grew up with ADHD, so I was particularly aware of it at that time, and I'm particularly aware of it now, or particularly aware of a particular student. In some ways, I'm here to be or appear as that student a little bit, but nevertheless, I think it, like when I said the question about where, like, have you used YouTube to look something up, learn a thing, figure it out, or like, even if it's with a car or anything that's not even music related, I think it's a dominant presence essentially now, regardless of whether that's your cup of tea or that it works for you. Make sure I'm not missing anything from that. Wendy says this maybe is how our students see music in school and music outside of school as two totally different worlds. 100%. And honestly, I would love if anybody feels like saying, commenting some of these things while I'm talking here about your experience a little bit in the classroom, because I have a feeling that is that's probably happening a lot right now. Particularly understand, I think that perspective about seeing them as two totally different worlds, partially the tools that, like I said at the beginning, there's a lot of these tools that are being brought down that, particularly with like this Emmer program, for example, or the stuff that I work with on a regular basis to make my own personal art, they're like media tools. They're tools. They're tools that were largely held up in media pipelines, commercial pipelines in particular. The internet democratized a lot of stuff, but at the same time that came with, or that's coming with, I don't know why I was thinking of this in the past. The internet democratized a lot of stuff, but at the same time that is coming with that like commercial layer, and I think due to the speed that it's connected with us, it's like not really it's sort of just like settled in. Like, for example, I have a 13-year-old student who is super into and interested in a world of this type of music, of beat making and pop music, that's like heavily YouTube oriented. It's here we go. YouTube. Internet money. So his mom is interested in him kind of looking at other avenues, like just coming to an awareness. Like he'll see stuff and he'll be like, I didn't even know that was a thing. I didn't know that that was possible, or something like that, with music, because she knows that he's like so focused on this. The thing, I had a conversation with a friend of mine recently about internet money in particular, is that they are such a dominant presence when it comes to music making right now, due to the way that algorithms work on search engines. If you search for something, obviously something with the most views, something with the most engagement, something with the most interaction is going to come up first, right? If I search for something like classical music, I mean, let's do it. I search for something like classical music, just literally just classical music, because I'll get onto something after I do that. So I search classical music. First of all, probably my searches are going to be skewed due to the fact that I'm logged into my account. But that being said, this keys into a point that I'd like to make overall here about this whole idea of kind of, let me look at the note again. Partnering with students, facilitating some of these things, facilitating some of these pipelines. I have a note written down here for myself, where I wanted to let you all know, what I wrote down was from my perspective that critically I need to know what I need. Like I need awareness, because the irony is now we're getting to a point where I can figure out whatever I want from a search engine. Then I need to know how to use a search engine, which doesn't mean that I need to know how to use a search engine, but it does mean that I need to know like what is out there. Like I need a really broad education, and I don't necessarily think that like even a like a survey type course, if I know guaranteed I'm interested in classical music, for example, classical music survey is probably going to facilitate that to an extent, but that's not necessarily going to guide me at a pipeline. It's just going to guide me at what, to my knowledge, like if a student comes to me and asks me to give them a survey, or if I have to teach a survey course, they're going to be limited to my awareness of that thing. And if I can spend time building my awareness, if I have the time to do that, then that's great. As an educator, I can spend time, and I definitely suggest that you spend time trying to just go, literally, it seems crazy, but literally Wikipediaing and Googling what you're into some every once in a while, and just go digging rather than looking for what you're looking for. Because this is what we're presented with now. Again, I just searched classical music. If that is the nuance to which I understand what classical music is, and if this is the nuance to which I understand what's possible in it, then I'm going to get hit with the most commercially viable version of that, due to the fact that everything is based off views and everything is based off of engagement. And I mean, it's not to say that this is like, I do not believe, and I don't think it's worth leaving this thinking, wow, this is just a sign of the times. This is a symptom of the algorithm. Like, wow, like we're really like going off the deep end. We're never going to be able to get back. It's more just like revealing what the reality is in the grand scheme of things. The fact is that this is the extent to people's understanding, and that's why it shows up like this. People make, like, a person had to make this video who also had the same type of awareness, right? So that all said, just like a search engine in some ways, again, like I said before about this whole effectively, we have to kind of be the communication line outside my window a little bit, and be aware that it's like I have to somehow increase the fidelity or something of what you're able to see. Again, this person's page seems to, I mean, if I'm searching classical music, if I'm trying to understand it, this appears to be like probably one of the main ways that I'm going to know it. In the grand scheme of things, again, like, this isn't to say that people who are looking at this are probably not the ones who are coming to classical music school, but they might be coming to a K-12 program, coming through and understanding it to this extent, right? Going out and seeing what does your landscape look like is possible now. You can actually see, like, what are people seeing. I can see the view count on these things. I can see what their experience is. And then from there, I can say, oh, well, you understand this perspective, or, okay, so you might know this, but what about, or, great, these are the greats. We have everybody, we have all of the classical music composers are here. But again, this is just one line, right? So I'll go back to this conversation that I was having about my 13-year-old student who is super into internet money. Do like the convenient, or maybe unique, I should say unique, the unique thing about classical education, jazz music education, pretty much everything that has been institutionalized for the longest time. I don't think it has this exact same, the experience for something like this is basically different than something like classical music. The experience for classical music will wind up being, like Wendy said, two totally different worlds. The experience for somebody who's coming to me and who's super into the most popular type of music production is going to be more like, okay, obviously we're in this same world, but I didn't realize other worlds existed. It's this fascinating thing. Like, I have a 16-year-old student who isn't into internet money, but is into, like, for example, if I look up Kenny Beats, this dude is one of the kind of, he pulls millions and millions and millions of views. And so if I look up, like, how, I mean, I wonder even what happens if I look up how to make music. Again, this might be skewed for me a little bit, but mostly the order of it will be skewed, not necessarily the actual videos. in fact, let's log out. Yeah. How to make music. Great. So that feels good to know that it didn't change that much. So this is what's coming up, right? Does this mean that you have to now go and be a music producer? No. But does it mean that a lot of people are using these tools and are understanding it from that lens? Yes. And so again, if I hop back to Internet Money, hop back to Kenny Beats, these people are extremely dominant in terms of their visibility. So when I have a student that comes to me that I know that is into this type of stuff, for me personally, working in electronic music and recording arts, what I know that I'll experience is somebody who is extremely capable at doing this, but doesn't always know what they're doing, but does know how to get from point A to point B. They're like fast, but they don't know what's happening. It sounds wild, basically. Here's somebody, Amy, wrote a comment. You are speaking of learners who are intrinsically motivated. Many of the students I work with are remarkably uncurious. Any new concept is weird or dumb, which I try to outlaw in my classroom, but they still creep in sometimes. Suggestions for encouraging curiosity in classrooms so kids become aware of what they might want to learn on their own. Starting to feel like the lack of curiosity is one of the greatest barriers to learning. My initial feeling about that, about how you're feeling and what you're experiencing is, I'm kind of curious to know what isn't weird. And I'm kind of curious to know what isn't dumb to them. And I'm also kind of curious to know what, because again, I don't necessarily know also what you're trying to show them as new. So for example, my experience of showing a lot of kids new concepts is something that maybe higher, let's say. So perhaps something more deeply institutionalized. And if I show them something outside of their wheelhouse, which this might be the wheelhouse type of music, again, if I look up how to make music, this might be what they know, because this is what they're hearing when I look up music. This is what they know as music. And so if I am trying to provide them with something that I consider to be more valuable, in all likelihood, it probably isn't getting 73 million views. And so it's hard to argue, or it's hard to take in as a student, somebody suggesting that something that doesn't get 74 million views, it didn't make them hundreds of thousands of dollars, is more valuable. I work mostly with elementary grades, and the nearer they get to middle school, the less interested they are in expanding their wheelhouse. Yeah, again, I'm very curious to know what their wheelhouse is. Like, I mean, I assume that their wheelhouse is kind of in this vein, but that's my assumption. I don't necessarily know if that's true. Because this is, I think, so am I sometimes. Their wheelhouse is actually mostly sports, not music. For sure. Yeah, I think that's really hard. Like it basically applies outside of this whole thing. I'm like talking purely from a music perspective, right? Yeah, anyone else experiences this, that would be great to hear. But I'm definitely speaking like purely from a music perspective. I completely see that. And I know that if you're having students coming in, it's essentially going to be like what I'm describing within music, but on the bigger picture, right? Like I can look up, like it doesn't matter what I'm into, right? I can go learn about it on here, and I will be learning about it, how to, like I could do like football plays. I could look up like Chutney soup. It's 5.2 million views. I could look up. I'd love anybody to make a suggestion. Oh yeah, I know. Like, there's so many amazing math lessons. Like, and if I was super duper into math, you know, like I just wind up being like me, but and here, how about show them twins, the new trends. Let's see what that looks like. Oh, sure. These guys react to like anything, like all sorts of old classic music, and I'd look up math lessons pass MTLE basic skills test. Totally. So yeah, I mean, to kind of bring this back around to Amy, I think, you know, the fact of the matter is like when you're working with kids in K-12, right? Like in the end, you know that you're trying to give them a broad education, and they're like, my maybe weird take, or kind of bizarre take, I don't know how to put it, is you know, how about I put it this way? I have a teacher. I had a teacher who, when I was doing composition lessons, when I brought up music like this, he had an interesting take that may resonate with you all, which is, you know, a lot of these young people are taking control over this time of their life. It doesn't matter where they're going, it doesn't matter what you're into, you'll find it this way, and you can learn whatever you want, right? So if I'm teaching elementary school kids, in general, it's going to be the exact same thing that we're talking about here with music. You're going to, if you don't have a nuanced understanding, or if you don't have a way of of getting a nuanced understanding of like what to look up, like if I look up minimal music, like let's say I know that, then I get techno, some Philip Glass, electronic music mostly. If I look up minimalist music, I get Philip Glass, Max Richter, Oliver Arnold, Arvo Pärt, Satie, Steve Reich. If I look up minimalist music, 90s or 2021, I probably won't get anything. Yeah, I go right back to house music. So I think, again, I wish that what we had were answers. I wish that like could be like revelatory right now, other than expressive.
Can I add something?
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. One of the things that has worked for us, my students and I, in terms of finding out interest in order to, you know, expand knowledge in the area of music is doing, like, I'll survey them several times throughout a semester and see what they are thinking about, you know, in order to, you know, help them learn more about what they're interested in, but also like get those um, introductions of things that are outside what they're interested in, if that makes sense. We're doing projects right now related to something that they're interested in. We're in the brainstorming phase of it, and we're just kind of all working together and sharing ideas and talking about what we're interested in, and through that they are opening each other's eyes up to other things to think about. And it's just like I'm involved in the conversation with them, but I'm not really, you know, telling them there's no right answer. It's just an open discussion about like what we're interested in, right? So that's just really working for us in our classroom. So I guess I'm putting that out there for people who might be feeling like, you know, kids are losing curiosity or whatever. I mean, it might, I don't know, they're curious and they're curious in some way because they are doing things. Like they're not just sitting there not doing anything, but to figure out what they're curious about is, yeah. Anyways, so I don't know. That's worked for us in terms of kind of finding out what they want to do. But at the same time, I'm not working with, which I think a lot of elementary schools probably are, maybe even middle school, high school. Well, I guess everybody, but I'm not working on a curriculum, so I'm not having to like sit there and figure out how to make students be a part of a curriculum that's not, you know what, I don't know. I don't know if I'm explaining myself
Absolutely.
correctly, but I definitely have some, you know, freedom to just let the kids take the course where they want to take it. So
Yeah, I feel that too. Being part of McPhail. And I feel for people who are in those positions who are trying to wrestle maybe with curriculum. And thank you for speaking up, Allison, because I think that is exactly what I feel as well. And you know, I think if there's going to be like a universal like take, it's something like that. It's something like see if you can start a conversation, you know, see if you can open it up, see if you can get them talking, see if you can get people talking about these things, because it is so varied. Connections do exist, and you know, I think the reason that it's maybe more accessible to non-curriculum education is that actually, you know, the primary space where things like conversations exist is community education, conversation-based practices. It's sort of it's essentially empowering your students to kind of figure out how to make decisions or communicate with one another, as opposed to trying to help them conform to the thing. Again, when this whole conversation is going to be bringing up basically this sort of opening this can of worms of like the system, right, and how certain parts of this contradict it, and run into it. When he's asking where you teach, Allison.
I teach at MTS, which is a network of charter schools. We're in Minneapolis, but we're not affiliated with Minneapolis Public Schools. I've been there for 4 full years. And before that, I mean, I'm still doing private lessons. I've been teaching private lessons for 15, 16 years. And so yeah, like our school, well, I mean, total side note, but like I live and work 4 blocks from the 3rd precinct, and so our school got completely destroyed in the uprising this summer, and so we're rebuilding right now, which is really great, and I'm very excited. But like, so when I add that in, because I was about to say our school has a recording studio, but it really doesn't because it's ruined, but we're rebuilding it. So, but we have, yeah, we have, right now I have the kids working on, Isaac, I'm really curious, like, I see that you're using Ableton Live. I
Yeah.
haven't quite gotten in there. We're using Soundtrap right now.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, but that was a really long answer to one question. I work at MTS Secondary School. But yeah, yeah, it's great. And I think that my history of doing private lessons and really connecting with students one-on-one and being able to, you know, partner with them in their personal music education highly influenced how I am as a classroom teacher, because I started and they were like, "Oh, what curriculum do you want to use?" and blah blah blah. I'm like, I don't know, because I need to meet the kids first. Like my even my semester flow is dictated by the humans that I'm working with in the first couple weeks of school. And you know, that didn't go, it was like when I first started there and I said, this is how I'm going to do things. It was kind of like, what? Yeah, okay, well, that seems like it might be a shit show, but you know, but then over the last 4 years of developing this music program, it's like, yeah, that's the way to go. Get to know your kids, get to, yeah, get them excited and invested in their learning. So
So right now we hear, just in reading about culturally relevant teaching and sustaining pedagogy and such, we hear about student choice and voice. And that's what I think of when you described these projects, that students are finding something that they are really interested in, and you're supporting them and doing some deep work in that, or they're supporting each other, maybe is maybe another way of putting it, where and I absolutely support that. And sometimes it's really hard in a traditional K-12 setting, that idea that we do so much group music making, and how do we even introduce some of that choice, you know, like, can there be a balance? How can we introduce something? And maybe that idea that you just talked about is there a project at some point in the year, or at some point in some grade, would there be a chance to just really jump in, and what are you really interested in, and really investigate that. Maybe that's something, as I don't know if anybody's still distance learning at this point in the year, but maybe that's something even for distance learning. I don't know. Am I down that path, a similar path to what you're talking about?
are you asking me that question?
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, yeah. I mean, we are we are going hybrid in at the end of March, which is interesting. But I think even when we were in the classroom, I'm trying to think of, like, I'm speaking specifically because I'm putting on like my elementary hat right now. I'm at a secondary school, which makes this idea of student choice and student voice a little bit more accessible in our thinking, right? I mean, it's accessible at the elementary level as well. I'm just trying to like put on my hat. I did some work with our elementary school last year before we shut down. And that was like, that was surveying kids about projects too. It was as easy as, you know, write down your favorite, you know, 5 songs and share with, you know, your neighbor about, you know, whatever it is. But I think more than, I know we like, as teachers, we like, you know, do this, like a very tangible sort of kind of step-by-step thing sometimes, but honestly, creating the vibe in the classroom that is just more of like a community discussion kind of thing, and it doesn't have to be this, you know, add, do it like this or anything like that. I don't know if I'm making sense, but making I guess normalizing the idea sharing and normalizing talking about what we're interested in with each other can lead to very organic, like creativity opportunity on the part of the teacher. Because if we're just opening up and just listening to the kids, in my experience, you know, especially at the elementary level, is like, okay, what can we do with this? And it's just kind of this sort of go from there, I guess, if I'm being clear. I wasn't
Definitely.
I wasn't I wasn't prepared to put the elementary hat on.
You can take it off.
But I like it. I like it. I mean, I'm working with some 7th graders right now who are pretty, they're fresh out of elementary, for sure.
Great. Cool. Thanks, everybody. Thank you so much, Allison, for sharing your experience so much. And thank you, Wendy, for the question. Yeah, and again, anybody else, if you ever feel like in the chat or anything, looks like Amy said, I work for a tiny district way up in Northwest Minnesota, 40 miles south of the Canadian border. There is something around 24 kids in a graduating class. There are some things I absolutely love about teaching in a small district, but it is true that the scope of exposure to new things is somewhat limited. Right. And that definitely illustrates kind of what I feel or felt, maybe even just in Brainerd, given how much I was online, for example. You know, like this disconnect between what I can see and what I can do, essentially, what I can be aware of and what I can actually interact with. There are definitely things that exist exclusively online or have deep, rich communities online. But I think, yeah, it's really quick to kind of go back to something I brought up at the beginning. I think, you know, I wish it sucks that I can't be like I got the answer or something like that, because I don't, but I do. It's great to see that everybody, in a way, it's great to see that kind of everybody this is the experience. And I think that we're all interacting with this exact thing. I wanted to go back to what Allison brought up about encouraging student choice, kind of as maybe distill it down to even just like teaching agency a little bit, showing people that they are capable of knowing something. They are capable of having a deep understanding of something, or at least as deep as they feel it, because they will, you know, most people have feelings, frankly, and they understand them very well, or at least they feel very real, right? So what my experience is very similar to Allison's. And again, I'm right now I'm teaching an after school program at John Marshall High School in Rochester, at distance. And so I'm hopping on Zoom, and then they just kind of show up on Zoom as well, or on Google Meet. It's not super important, but this is something that I actually wanted to bring up because I have a note about it, which is that experience of it sort of being like, there's this like, it feels so long, this like period where there's like nothing happening almost, because you're just trying to assess who is in front of you. You have to, it takes time basically to kind of get to know everybody, and particularly with class sizes being so variant across the state, that time frame may vary. But in my experience, there's a ramp up once you get there, And it's not just, which I've seen sometimes, like particularly in college, it's not just being like, all right, let's go around the room and like introduce ourselves, although that could be useful for you. But anyways, you know, the exponential kind of increase in speed is what I've noticed as a difference from like standard curriculum learning. I spent a whole ton of time learning through curriculums, and basically for me, because again I have ADHD, this is my experience of hitting these very extrinsic sort of oriented things. It was like this fight of trying to stay in that track, but in situations that I've gotten to be in that are very open, or in this situation that I'm teaching right now, that are more about, let's just get to know each other, let's figure this out, and let's see who we all are, what we're all interested in. And then as a teacher playing kind of organizer, I have found, and I think it's probably the case in general, the speed sort of like makes up the difference. It starts off slow, like I said, this sort of exponential increase, as opposed to like curriculum learning. It's sort of like a guarantee. It sort of feels, I think it exists as kind of like a guarantee. It's a linear thing. It's sort of guaranteed to like, we'll have some sort of like referent for like point A and point B, and like there's like little guideposts along the way that show us what we're up to or whatever. But the loss in that is the sort of you rely on the kids to self-organize in some ways, or you have to apply some sort of external thing to get them to get into this organization that you have come up with at the front. And we're just so different now. Like, to go back to my description, this nonlinear and branching idea, you know, our the elementary school comment, their wheelhouse is actually mostly sports, not music. You know, it's like this is just one super minor thing in when we were talking about just a bunch of different people. But you know, when you get up to the college level, or you know, secondary school and high school, maybe even just high school, kids are already getting to a point where, for better or worse, they're kind of on the track, sort of. And I have feelings about that, and I'm not certain about what it means for kids to be so tapped into basically a working mentality so young. But it is kind of what it is, because we have, like I said, the bulk of what you see here is industry stuff. It's market. It's not just sort of life. And I think that's maybe speaks a little bit also to the sort of wheelhouse thing. It might feel like, oh, this is their wheelhouse, this is what they're interested in, but it's like, it's because it's a market, you know, it's because it's effectively, this speaks again to something that I have feelings about, that I'm not certain on, but that I am pretty sure is what this relates to. These kids are basically getting jobs at 13 because they are able and capable of learning the exact industry pipeline for a thing at any time. And if they are capable of getting on there, they will go super far. Particularly, like I said, music is sort of the blueprint right now of this stuff. In the last decade, we had a wave of people of under 18 or around the age of 18 becoming millionaires from music contracts. It's and the thing is because music right now is particularly media viable, it just looks great. And like, it's a lot of music videos, it's a lot of audio visual, it's like the whole thing is there. I can see it all. I can see kind of how it works. If I'm curious about how something works, I might be like, if I really like Ariana Grande, I might be like, how to make an Ariana Grande song. I mean, like, look at the suggestions even. Because they are becoming the teachers now, essentially. Like, this is like, because it's this sort of like, it feels extremely real when you're living in it. because it's just the market. I mean, it's like, regardless, we all know that when we get out of school, we have to get a job. And so like, it's just sort of infiltrated basically all the way down to like 13-year-olds. Like I said, my 13-year-old student is super in this world. He already has a YouTube channel. He already posts like often. He has a SoundCloud where he posts often, and he's working every single day. If I give him an assignment, it's done. Well, an assignment. When I'm like, hey, make a thing, it's like he sends it to me like in like 20 minutes. That's another aspect that's very music exclusive, but it's showing something about what the future could look like. A lot of music is made in really short order because it's fighting algorithms, and it needs to be bite-sized. It needs to be really quick because it's fighting algorithms. It needs to generate views. You know, there's a really common practice of things being like a minute and a half long, like a song that's a minute and a half long, partially because of attention spans, but also largely because it looks better on the algorithm. If I can make a minute and a half long song that's really catchy that I can put on repeat, because a lot of people listen to stuff on repeat, and it generates 100,000, versus if I had made it 3 minutes long and now it only generated 25,000 or something like that, that's better. And I also want to say one other thing, you know, about the market aspect of it. It's not, I really don't want to imply that what you then go do is necessarily say, okay, well, we have to figure out a way to make our education market oriented. Although that's an answer, but I think that like, due to the fact that it basically suggests that, you know, we're pushing younger and younger and younger when you should start working, essentially start acquiring a working mentality, is dangerous. So I want to point that out. But again, to say that I think, due to the way that the algorithm works, again, if I say how to make music, speaking of student agency, for example, therefore what I need, like a great practice, like Allison brought up, how to make a decision, how to know that I have the power to scroll down right now. That can come from just simply having people talk about what they're interested in and having that sort of bounce around the room. You can, in places like Minnesota in particular, you can create pipelines. Like I said before, like since so many of these are pipelines, and since so many of them don't necessarily exist in the locale of Minnesota or of northern Minnesota or wherever, if you can encourage students, or if students are encouraged to believe that what they know is true, at least to a certain extent, and then bounce that off of other people, they can make pipelines. You know, I had in this after school program, after we were working for a couple of months, and then I found out somebody made a band, you know, and it's like, there you go. You know, these are people who like haven't even gotten to go to shows or like see live music of the stuff that they like listening to, but they made a band. And that's the only way these things start, you know, is by them starting. So if you can encourage them, if people, period, are encouraged to believe that what they believe is at least worthy, you know, those pipelines can sort of just start forming in front of you without you necessarily having to be like this ultimate genius or something like that, that can just like make them, because yeah, that's too much. So 12, 13. Are there any other thoughts right now? I don't, again, absolutely no pressure, but is there anything anybody is thinking about? Wendy said, do you find that students, do you find that the students you work with can read music notation? That is such a tenuous topic within electronic music. It's fascinating to me, because no, I don't think so. But at the same time, I'm fortunate enough to be sort of part of McPhail. So I do at the same time get a lot of people who grew up playing piano or, you know, also do composition, music composition, like classical composition, for example. But in the grand scheme of things, like for example, my best experience with this right now, that's most recent, is with the John Marshall High School in Rochester. I remember when we were first getting people registered, the people who are sort of facilitating it, one of them is teaching the choir, for example. He is one of the music teachers at the school, and he was saying how there's a number of people who he didn't recognize, who weren't part of the music program, basically, which was cool. Like, that's exciting to see that like, it's like verifiable. Okay, great. Like, if we put electronic music or whatever in a school, then like there will be more people coming into music. But at the same time, what that does come with is also realizing this space online, is their whole awareness. And so the other thing too is that what's fascinating to me about electronic music software in general is that it's basically accessibility. A lot of it functions very similarly to accessibility tools and accessibility everything. It functions on that same level. I don't need to know scales because I can turn on the scale button. I don't necessarily need to have pitch accuracy. And for some people, it actually sounds better if I don't, because that's just the aesthetic or the mentality, that if I can't hit the notes, but then I can because I have auto-tune. It's more interesting because it shows that I don't have to be able, I don't have to necessarily have access to that. I don't have to have access to that skill or to that level of education, or I don't have to have access to the money that can afford me that level of education to be able to hit a note or to whatever. I don't have to have that access of culture. I didn't have to go to church, or I didn't have to be able to do whatever, but I can still do it. For a lot of people, that's a huge part of why this stuff is so successful and why it's so compelling. But yeah, so that's the long answer to, can they read music notation? The students who are in music, who, a lot of them are accessing this stuff can, but the ones who are coming from outside of it, there's no way, but they're accessing it different ways.
I think that's really interesting because as we're working with the new Minnesota standards in the arts, so music has new standards, and I didn't have anything to do with writing them, but I'm just, part of my job is to help people understand them. Is just that idea that one of the underlying tenets is it doesn't matter what you know, it's what you do with what you know.
Truly.
So, and then also there's no place in there, even in the composition area or the create area, it says that you can document or record or, document whatever you create, either using some symbol of notation or music notation or recording technology.
Right.
So I think it opens up the door for us to, I'm not saying that it's not important, because in my teaching, I would have been right there. My kids knew how to draw a quarter note and they knew how, whatever.
Sure.
But it does open up the door for new ways of knowing or new ways of showing what you know, that maybe more connect to what's happening outside of the school walls.
Definitely.
And so I think I think those people who were working on the standards were kind of insightful there.
I agree. And, this is something I experienced if you know enough about music notation and the history behind it, it's within, particularly within ethnomusicology, right? It definitely reveals the sort of restrictive nature of it. But I have a student who's interested in film, and students who are interested in beats in the after school program. And I have to be like, notation is, my perspective is that basically notation is extremely useful for stuff that uses it. because they are getting to a certain place on that vehicle. They're writing music notation over to whatever it is. But there's a whole like an enormous part of the world that isn't using that, or traditions that don't, that when you try to align it with those things, it sort of like breaks apart. Like gamelan, Japanese gamelan has a French notation that was developed that has numbers for each pitch, which seems pretty straightforward, but what it inadvertently does is reestablish what time is in that language and in that space, in that world, right? So anyways, I think so too, and it definitely breaks open some of those things.
I think that it's talking about notation is like one way that we can decenter like Western music as the end all be all, because a lot students, because it's been, shoved in our face, like Western music notation is music. And it's like, no, 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 no. Western music notation was made for a purpose, but
Yeah.
there are so many different. So when we start talking about music notation, I don't even start with Western music notation. I start with something else. Whether it's like the most recent thing that I've done is I used to talk about gamelan. I've shown like gamelan, what that looks like, what Arabic styles might look like, some ancient, just all of this stuff. And it's like, what do you think this is? Well, I don't know. It could be this. I'm like, this is all music notation. And then we start talking later about Western music notation and the function of it. But it's, in my opinion, it's really, I like what you said. It's a vehicle, Isaac. It's a vehicle to go somewhere, but you don't, if that's not where you're going, that's okay too.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think it's just important to like name that Western music notation is just that. It's like one way of doing things, and it's not the end all be all.
Yeah.
And in fact, one of my students, this was like 2 years ago, he was writing this stuff and he was trying to figure out this song and he made his own notation. And I was like, that's exactly how music notation starts. So like, go for it. You don't have to follow what I know. And then, being really honest too with students about like, this is what I was trained in and this is what I know, but it doesn't make it like the best way, because somebody, from India who was trained is going to have a different, and my way that I know that I was taught isn't any more, whatever. So I just, having those conversations is, I think, really important. And that also will honor students' ways of knowing as well by,
Yeah. Thank you, Allison. It's so true. I wanted to kind of piggyback on that by bringing up the piano roll in music production software. I went to school at Cal Arts in the the long name is Music Composition and Experimental Sound Practices program. And one thing that I've found that a lot of people deal with in a similar way, who are coming purely from electronic music or purely from music production, they wind up battling with the format of the music production software, because in a lot of ways, for better or worse, regardless of where you're coming from at this point, even if music production software was a way around it, people are learning from piano rolls. People know how to read piano rolls, basically. And this is the sort of the way that it looks. It's basically, it has a piano along the left-hand side, right? And then when you click in a note, you'll hear it back or whatever, but it's on a piano. So the thing is it's just a representation of some computer information that I can change, and I can alter these so that they don't fit this scale or whatever, but this is still like what you're presented with, right? So it's at the very least kind of more breakable or more bendable, so it can kind of fit a bit. And the reason I wanted to kind of piggyback with piano roll is just to say that For people who aren't using music notation, they a lot of times are like, there's piano teachers online, for example, that are sharing MIDI files because they're easier to read along with, or hear back, or play back, or whatever. So a lot of people are starting to get into this world, but the I keep like flicking back, but there again, to combine it with what Allison was saying, this is still replete with these problems. Basically, they're just easier to move away from because, you know, they're still nevertheless bendable, but you need to know how to bend it. You need to know that that is even a thing, that it is restricting or whatever. You need to have an awareness still. So I want to hop over here to Raquel. Thank you for writing this long comment. Finding connections really helps. When we first started distance learning, I incorporated Ed Sheeran and Ariana Grande as introductions to introducing Andrea Bocelli. They had performed duets with him. Many students were shocked to hear these performers they know say how much they were inspired by Bocelli. I then introduced them to Jackie Evancho, so they could hear how she could switch between genres. Many said they downloaded new songs after reflecting on that short unit, and so they did not realize kind of younger people were successful in another vocal style. I never had to share my opinions, but could offer short reflections as guidance to see more overlap potential. I think a lot of people experience this with Lady Gaga as well. Same type of thing. It's like, oh yeah, she could do this, she can do that, she can do these things. Allison also said, my students who love video games absolutely love the Raining Notes tutorials. Totally. Yeah, so this is awesome. It's 12:25, so I don't necessarily want to get too deeply into something else, but I do kind of want to close out. Thank you again so much for sharing stuff and kind of joining the conversation. I wanted to wrap back around. I'm going to reread this partially for me. Loving music today means being tapped into a vast network of sounds and styles where anyone, anywhere can have a shared experience. Thus, our teaching must become as nonlinear and branching as this network. We'll explore not so new spaces of auto-didactic music education, how the people of today are forming their own educational spaces in the blind spots they create. I do feel like I didn't necessarily cover this that much, which is not a big deal, but I'll suffice it to say part of me talking about things like internet money or looking over YouTube is to say that is to sort of address this. The thing about it is, like, autodidactic music education spaces have been happening regardless of the internet or not, and they happen in, like, as a human, you're going to have a tendency to just learn stuff. You know, it's very natural for people to want to figure things out, and the blind spots, I'd like to just sort of connect as being what I was talking about things like algorithms, about sort of the dominant vision. Don't have a tendency, or try not to have a tendency, to see the algorithm as it is biased, but it's not necessarily like generating something that's changing the perspective of the world at large per se. Like, not inherently. It's just doing a really good job at revealing what was already happening. You know, like pop music it's been this way for decades, right? Or for longer. Pop music has sort of had this dominant presence, classical music or whatever, or institutionalized music, or art music has sort of taken a back seat, or, you know, these types of things. But at the very least, you know, you can at least see and have kind of know where, you know, what your students are being confronted with. And the blind spots are largely when students are coming from that perspective, they might not even realize what else is possible. So sometimes I've found for some of my students, it is literally sufficient to be like, have you heard of this? Did you even know this was a thing? Because if you can set them up to know that it exists, if they're already learning, and if they already know how to at least Google something, if they are interested, they will go get more, or they'll ask you for more. Yeah, to kind of close off last couple of minutes, I said right away that I kind of wanted this to be a case in point. So I hope it was a bit of a case in point. I was really excited to see people talking and having a conversation and stuff like that. for me, my particular mental persuasion is useful because I can sort of like, I don't know, bring in a bunch of weird things that I saw, and people will want to speak up if they're encouraged to do so. And I hope that you can at least bring some of what happened today, if the conversations weren't necessarily super elucidating for you. Hopefully just what we did and what you saw here happen is something that you can apply a little bit. You know, people will talk. people have opinions, and they're awesome. I love them. So anyways, cool. That's all I got. Thank
Fabulous.
you, everybody.
Fabulous. More questions, lots of stuff to think about maybe this week. And yeah, so hold those thoughts, and we just consider even what's happening and and how you can interact with maybe some of the things that you heard. I have copied the chat, and Isaac is going to share a link for the whole conversation if you wanted to go back and listen. We have a number of people that weren't able to join us today, but we'll get those people kind of up to speed and into the conversation for next week as well.
Yeah.
You got us started really well, Isaac. Thank you so
Awesome.
much.
Thank you, everybody.
Appreciate it. Have a great weekend, everyone. Bye-bye. See you next Saturday.
Bye. Thanks, everybody.